Hey, true believers. Chris Mack coming at you with Hero for Hire #1. This is essentially the first appearance of Luke Cage, and this is a reprint that came with the Toy Biz Marvel Legends Luke Cage Mojo Wave. So that's kind of cool. I wish, though, even though we get a reprint that comes with the figure, I wish that they would have kept the original 70s ads and all that stuff, kind of like they're doing with a lot of the reprints now. That would have been really cool. But nonetheless, at least this way, we get the story. And the print date for the original comic book was June of 1972. Whew, back in the day. So with that said, let's jump into this really good comic book. So a lot of comic books do not do stuff like this anymore. It says Luke Cage, Hero for Hire, out of Harlem, a hero. And we kind of get this cool little montage effect of everything that kind of, it's sort of like an aria if you want to think of it in terms of operatic themes, because you kind of get the idea of everything that's going on, and you see this look of pain on Luke's face. And before we get into the dialogue, let's look at who made this book. A blazing new Marvel milestone, edited by Stan Lee, written by Archie Goodwin, drawn by George Tuska, Billy Graham inker, Skip Holkoff letterer, with the considerable creative contributions of Roy Thomas and John Romita. So, what makes this interesting, and this is something that comic books don't do anymore. So check this out. It says, look closely at the figure before you. Study him. Study his costume. This is Luke Cage, now a superhero, yet unlike any before him. But he was not always as you see him. Before the superhero, there was a man. What follows then is the story of that man, the making of a strangely unique superhero. And with that, you're hooked. You're like, well, what do they mean different? And it is definitely a different take, because this book, a lot of comics now, let me kind of stop here, will introduce a hero and immediately they're good at everything, or to an extent, and they don't do a whole lot of wrong, and it takes that hero's journey away. So you don't have so in a way it feels like they don't deserve this power that's been given to them, or to be able to give themselves the title of superhero or hero. So with this, we open up on this island prison, and it's called Seagate. It says Seagate, sometimes called Little Alcatraz by its inmates, and more often hell. And we see that these guards are bringing this prisoner out of solitary, and they're just talking about how they want to break him because he's so hard-headed. And you see that this character, he's like, nice thing about being half blind from the dark, Court, I don't have to see your face first thing. So this character is not exactly the nicest person in the world either. And you see once he's out in the yard, his old crew's talking about trying to overthrow this new warden, and they're saying, I'm the leader of this bunch, I'll get my own crew. And he turns on them in a heartbeat and just smacks them in the face. He's like, now how you gonna do that, Comanche? With your cutting hand all caught up catching teeth. Whew. So anyway, before this new warden shows up, this Captain Rackman, I think's his name, is trying to cut a deal with him to just kind of be an informant. And this Lucas character is saying, I'm not no informant, and basically buys himself a one-way trip back into solitaire. Now remember, this comic book came out in 1972, so it is a product of its time in terms of racial issues. So as you go through this, you're going to see a lot of that. And I know in modern society that's going to really twist a lot of people, which I can understand because it's not okay. But the way that I look at it is kind of like when you go to a museum and you observe the past, so that you know how the old saying goes, those who can't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. So as I'm reading these parts, I'm looking at it through the eyes of like a historian. And it really does add to the enrichment of the comic book, because you kind of see where comic writers were in the 70s compared to 2020 at the time of this recording. So it's an interesting take. I mean, I wasn't around in the 70s, so for me to kind of read this, it's like, wow, kind of see how things were. So just look at it that way as you're reading it. And it really helps the story move along and whatnot, and really makes you care for this Lucas character. Now, what's cool, well, not cool, but let's talk about in terms of writing intention. So Lucas mouths off again, and he starts to get beat. And some of the other guards are like, you can't lay a hand on a prisoner. What are you doing? But it continues. The ugly sound echoes through the cell block. A flat, moist sound of flesh being struck. Again and again. A sound to drive all listening into a frenzy. Whew. It gives you chills because you see how corrupt this prison is and how it's not okay and how they treat their inmates, especially ones that are just kind of trying to mind their own business to a degree. But then we're introduced to the new warden, and he really starts to clean up the cell block, or the prison itself. And what's cool is this guy, Quirt, I think's his name, he gets caught beating Lucas, and something happens that the warden here is able to give Lucas a chance for some payback. I don't want to go into it too much there, or what happens with that Captain Rackman. But as time passes, you start to see that things are kind of starting to change. And this doctor comes in. And he goes, I just want to check your wounds. And he goes, why, man? I'm healing fine. Somebody afraid I might plan to sue the state? Let's just say I try getting to know a man before I work with him. And he's like, what do you mean working together? So they start talking about this special medical project that might give Lucas, I think's his name, a chance at parole, because in the past, he's talking about how he was framed. He's like, you jokers got to sit behind those starched shirts passing judgment on me? You think I'm lying? I was framed, blast you, framed. So you're just kind of like, wait a minute, you just think this is like some regular inmate. And this doctor even says, a lot of inmates always claim frame. So we get backstory. And that's a lot of what a lot of modern, like new heroes, we don't get their backstory. And we come to find out here that Lucas wasn't exactly the greatest of saints. Him and one of his buddies, they started moving up the streets of Harlem, and how they were able to kind of start getting a name for themselves. But what happens is you notice that Lucas's buddy starts to really, he finds this woman, and he starts to live like, like a, what do you call it, like a godfather, essentially wanting to run his own gang. And Lucas is like, I don't want to be part of this. And then the friendship is strained because of this love interest. But there's one thing that I do like is Lucas's friend bites off more than he can chew and starts getting beat. So I believe this girl's name was Reva. Yeah, Reva comes to Lucas and says, I need your help. He goes, sure, we was rival over Reva, but still, friends. And what kind of man won't lay it on the line for a friend? So you see that these redeeming qualities. And as you're reading this, you see that the pages aren't boring. There's nothing really flat. There's dynamicness about it. Especially the way he takes out the thugs that are hurting his friend. But with all that said, something happens that causes a schism, which I don't want to get into. But it riles Lucas enough to want to undergo this procedure. And while he's in it, something happens with that Rackman character. And this is where we start to see, I mean, look at the way the body, what's that called? Not analogy, what's that word called? Anatomy, there it is. He's just able to rip this machine apart. And the inks and the colors really add to this book. It is absolutely beautiful and a great way of old school artwork, because this was not digitally done in 1972. So this is artwork that I miss. Great dynamicness like this. Now I'm going to skip some pages because I don't want to spoil this. Now we're back in the present, and there's a way that Lucas gets out of prison, and he has revenge on his mind now that he's been through that experimentation. And what I like is through this hero's journey, remember how I was saying how these older books, they showed how these characters earned their superhero status. Now what I like about this book is that by the end of issue 1, he's not exactly still a hero with a virtue, you know what I mean? He uses his powers to make money because he can't survive on the streets, and he changes his name from Lucas to Luke Cage. So now, trying to make this money with these powers, with this uniform, he sets out on a course for revenge. And it's kind of funny what he says here. He goes, yeah, outfit's kind of honky, but so what? All part of the superhero scene. And this way, when I use my powers, it's going to seem natural. A little promotion work, and I'm in business. And so all his cards say Luke Cage, hero for hire. So here, yeah, it could get, again, it doesn't exactly show Luke become a virtuous hero, but we see that as the years progress. It's just interesting to see how this person who starts out with this vengeance in his heart for being framed eventually becomes a household name in the Marvel universe. And one thing that drives me nuts that I didn't reference at the beginning of this review is the fact that, see how there's all this blank red in the original 72 release? There's like this cool like Pulp Fiction background. There's a bar, there's Reva in the background. It looks like the cover of Shaft in a sense, but I guess because this went out with action figures, they didn't want to promote that, which sucks because it's just like you want something to look like the original. But nonetheless, great story. I'd like to actually have a copy of the original for my collection, but I'm happy that I finally got to read it. Speaking of, if you guys have enjoyed this comic book, please first and foremost support your local comic shop and see if you can pick up a copy for a relatively decent price, since this is an older book. And if you've enjoyed this review, we would really appreciate it if you take a moment to hit like, share, and subscribe. Helps the club channel more than you could possibly know. And if you wouldn't mind hitting that fancy little Power Man bell next to subscribe, that way as we continue to upload content, you guys will get notified. Come to the channel, and we'd love to hear your feedback down in the comments below, or our social media pages, which I'll make sure to leave the links down in the description below. So with all that said, thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you all continue to have an absolutely amazing day reading, and happy hunting, true believers.